Thank you, Nick. The Society, in its wisdom, has decided to inflict 2 Kemps on you this evening in the hope that I can perhaps reveal some family secrets about David. Well, I can, to be quite frank, and many of you would have enjoyed that paper. I thought it was fantastic. But the truth is there's a paper that he prepared for this evening which is twice as long as that. And hopefully you will have the opportunity to read the full paper in the proceedings. But David gave a brilliant summary and well done. I've had a very long association with the Samuel Griffith Society. When I first ran for the Senate in 1989, a long time ago, I had to list on the application form to the Liberal Party the organisations to which I belonged. And you'll be pleased to hear, Xavier, that the Samuel Griffith Society was first on the list. This was followed by the IPA, and great to see the director of the IPA here this evening, Scott Hardgraves, and the H.R. Nichols Society. They were regarded in those days as great references for running for the Senate, and they still are in my view. So this is the second occasion which I've had the opportunity to speak to the Society. In 1994, at the Brisbane conference, John Stone asked me to present a paper on international tribunals and Australian democracy. I had been banging on in the Senate about this for about 2 years, and clearly the word had got to John that if he wanted a discussion on the external affairs power and on treaties, that Rod Kemp was his man. Now, John was a notoriously hard taskmaster. One of my colleagues in the Parliament, who I won't name, presented a paper to the Society which John Stone deemed unsatisfactory. He said that it was only included in the proceedings of the Society for the sake of completeness. But clearly John was pleased with my paper, and he congratulated me on the insights that I provided into the Australian treaty process and the external affairs power. But my pleasure was somewhat deflated when he asked me who wrote the paper. And I was absolutely taken aback at that because I was feeling so pleased with myself, and I mumbled to John that of course I was the author. I'm not sure whether he accepted that or not, but anyway, that's what I said to him. I've always been surprised. David and I have, as brothers of course, we so often get confused for each other. I'm regularly congratulated on my 5-volume history of liberalism, of which I'm always prepared to accept. Sometimes I reveal the real facts, but sometimes the conversation moves on. More of this later. But it's always struck me, how could this confusion arise? And I think David would confirm that. It happens about once or twice a week that someone will come up and get our names wrong. David will be called Rod and I'll be called David. And we find it very confusing because I have a reputation of being a serious and intellectual, which are clear points of difference to my brother. And of course, for many years, David sported a very handsome beard, and I think the older people amongst us, Erica Betts, Santo Santoro and Nick Minchin will remember that. In fact, David's beard was quite famous, and he particularly delighted political cartoonists. Anyway, the story goes on, a gentleman down on his luck he used to position himself outside the parliamentary station in Spring Street. And with his collection tin outstretched, he would call out in a loud voice each time I passed, in the hope that he could induce a larger donation, he would say, "Hello, David, how are you?" One time I stopped and pointed out to him that I was not David, but his brother Rod. He paused for a moment and then said, "And why have you shaved your beard off?" Anyway, it is true that David and I do talk a lot. We get on remarkably well. I suppose that doesn't apply to all brothers, but anyway, David has been a great help to me in my career and an inspiration in many ways. And congratulations, David, on your address this evening. As I said, I've read the full speech, and it's even better, actually. So, and I'm sure that everyone here would have gathered David's remarks grow out of his remarkable 5-volume history of Liberal ideas in Australian politics. David immediately saw the voice, failed on the first principles of liberalism, and he was very fast out of the blocks saying that he would be a no voter and would not support it. Australia's future, David says, and I agree with him, depends very much on remaining a country whose institutions and policy embody the ideals of liberalism. David has provided his thoughts this evening after extensive experience, and I think this is worth noting, working with Indigenous leaders as a minister in the Howard government, and more recently as a member and chairman of the Australian Heritage Council. As Minister for Education and later for the Environment, and as chair of a range of ministerial councils dealing with a variety of Indigenous issues, David has had more involvement with these issues than most politicians and most ministers. A policy for which he was responsible documented the shocking lack of basic literacy and numeracy skills in many Indigenous communities. The Indigenous literacy and numeracy strategy that he developed has underpinned the progress he mentioned in his remarks. I've got a number of takeouts from David's speech, and perhaps I might like to share them with you. The humanitarian sentiment, which is something that most people would strongly support. We like the humanitarian sentiment, but it can lead us down dangerous paths if it's not based on a realistic assessment of the challenges we're facing. And I've been particularly struck by David's argument that policies moved by the desire to help people, by what he calls the humanitarian sentiment, can so easily go off track and end up hurting the very people they are designed to protect. Aboriginal policy, where there are important cultural issues to be addressed, seems to be a standout example. Policies for remote Aboriginal communities that have focused on welfare and failed to provide access to knowledge and opportunities in the wider society can certainly do this. Many people here will recall the devastating effects of a decision of the Arbitration Commission, well, not many people, perhaps some people I should say, of the 1965 Northern Territory cattle industry case, when the Commission removed wage flexibility for Indigenous employees. This led to mass unemployment of Indigenous workers in the industry. Indeed, a misplaced humanitarianism can underpin much of the support for the voice. The voice may not actually have the power to make policy, but David warns us correctly that it is highly likely to become such a centre of power within Indigenous Australia, and perhaps a significant reason why many Indigenous people simply do not support the voice. Let me turn to another takeout, is the role of business. And David mentioned in his remarks that so many institutions, including business, have just been prepared to accept the arguments which are put forward by the government, have indulged in virtue signalling, and of course, and what is described as soft racism. David points out that the arguments offered by government and almost all its supporters are so thin, based on unexplored and often unargued assumptions. He points out that very few attempts have been made to show that the voice will improve policy to overcome Indigenous disadvantage, let alone strengthen Australia's democratic political culture. This is certainly demonstrated in sections of business and who have contributed millions of dollars to funding the Yes case. For a number of years I was involved with the raising funds for the IPA, and of course we tended over that period. I don't think this was personal to me, but business decided to withdraw from getting involved in organisations that could be seen to be political, and of course the Liberal Party itself suffered because of a number of major corporations withdrew funding from the party, despite that these organisations were strong proponents of free enterprise. And of course, in the current era, Alan Joyce has become the poster boy of woke business. Now, let me ask you a question. When did we last see a business leader actually enter the debate and attempt to address the major criticisms of the voice? There's only one leader that I can think of who has come out strongly on this issue. There may be others, but this one has achieved quite a bit of press. The former NAB Chief Executive and BHP Chairman, Don Argus, has fired a timely warning shot across the bowels of business. Argus notes that many companies have stated their support without knowing the full details of the voice. He says this raises the question whether they have breached their fiduciary duties and indicates a number of legitimate questions which all boards may confront at forthcoming AGMs. And he gives a couple of examples of these. Did the board have full knowledge of the information now available in the 26 plus 86 other pages supporting the referendum before consideration was made to take a public stance on an issue which is decided by all voters, not just shareholders? And another question he fired across the bows to worry boards, as there will be economic consequences to a successful yes or no vote, what impact does that have on respective industry, and in particular the financial performance of the individual entity? So we hope there are a few nervous chairmen and board directors as they go towards their AGM, and this issue is certainly gripping the nation at the moment, and it will certainly hot up further in the coming weeks. I think one of the other things that David had the courage to say, and it always makes a politician nervous to say, gee, that was a really courageous comment you made. But David did list the extraordinary progress of Indigenous people over the last 50 years or so in terms of recognition, economic and social progress, land rights, and of course parliamentary representation. But the claim of Indigenous progress and achievement with the wider Australian community is a complete anathema to the propaganda of the no proponents. And none will recognise that there has been not only progress, but David has pointed out to a number of areas where there has been great progress, and including, I might say, in the representation of Parliament, in which David presented the figures. Now, but my other takeout is who will be blamed for the failure of the referendum? We all hope, I suspect the majority of people here hope that the referendum will fail. I certainly do. But far from being let me quote the Prime Minister, a modest, generous and gracious proposal for recognition, David argues the voice is already the largest claim for constitutional power made for any specific interest in Australia's history. The ALP clearly hopes that should the referendum fail, the coalition will be blamed. My own view is that large sections of the Australian community will thank Peter Dutton and his team for saving the nation from constitutional disaster. However, should the yes vote succeed, Labor will wear the consequences. And let me just instance that the recent WA Heritage Bill shows the danger of legislative overreach with its attendant electoral dangers. And we can see what happened in Western Australia with the legislative overreach with its Heritage Bill, that support for the Western Australian Labor government collapsed. If the polls are to believe, the vast majority of Liberals and National Party people are no voters. And I guess, like Nick Minchin and Santo Santorio and Erica Betts, who were their former senators, I am dismayed by the lack of support Peter Dutton is receiving from some state Liberal leaders. With some encouragement, hopefully they will remember their Liberal principles and resist the fashionable pressures of identity politics and a misplaced humanitarian sentiment. A good start to help persuade them would be for David's paper to be forwarded to these Liberal leaders, along with the other excellent papers presented at the 33rd conference of the Samuel Griffith Society. As I've said, I've been to quite a number of these conferences. This particular conference is absolutely outstanding, and with the quality of the speakers and the papers, congratulations to all those who have been involved, and to Xavier Boffa and his team. It's wonderful to see the recovery of the society after COVID, and to put on a conference of this standing and this size. So congratulations to all those who are involved. And I think probably that'll be the last vote of thanks David will ever want me to give to his papers. So thank you very much.